Hello and welcome to the back row on Air Sport. Well, it's a massive European weekend ahead for the provinces and we'll be digging into that on tonight's show. In studio with me are Cian Tracey of the Irish Independent and Gerry Thornley of the Irish Times. Massive weekend ahead for us, guys. It's going to be a busy one. We'll talk about that in part two, but first we want to look at, I guess, the increasing prevalence of movement of players between the provinces. It seems to be happening more regularly than ever. Now, Cian Keller, the latest example, returning to Leinster. I mean, there is a broader issue there, but first of all, on that move, Cian, do you think it's a good move for him, the player?
I think it's an interesting move. I think when he left Leinster, I don't think Leinster wanted him to leave. I think it's important to make that clear. I think after he had agreed to join Connacht, the picture changed very quickly in Leinster, with Luke Fitzgerald retiring and things like that. It's an interesting one. I think he's been very good with Connacht without sort of setting the place alight. I think we might have expected him to kick on a little bit more out there. I still think he has a mistake in him. I think we saw that in the Ulster game, but it's a good move for him. You'd hope that he's looking at the bigger picture in terms of forcing his way back into the Ireland frame, but he's a long way back, you'd think, at the moment. And I suppose if he's going back, you'd imagine maybe that Leinster have given him a nudge in terms of what the squad is going to look like next season, because at the moment it looks stacked, but you'd imagine maybe one or two might leave to make room for him. And look, he's a Dublin lad. He grew up playing for Leinster. His brother Ronan is in the academy. I don't think you could begrudge a guy moving back home, and he's still only 24, is he? So he has plenty of time, I suppose, on his side to reignite his career almost, because he still has huge potential, I feel.
It's possibly, not a major surprise he's returning to Leinster, would have always wanted to, but it has become common. Carberry was obviously the kind of controversial example. We got Jordy Murphy, even Nick McCarthy is going to go down to Munster from Leinster next season. Gerry, do you see this movement as a positive for Irish rugby?
By and large, yes. There's always been a degree of cross-fertilisation. You think of Victor Costello's back in the day, Owen Redden moving between provinces, Jerry Flannery moving to Connacht, come back to Munster, several of them. There's always been an element of it, and it's benefited Ireland. I think, as things stand, there's something like at least 36 players playing in the other provinces who are playing in different provinces of where they came from. And of those, 27 of them are Leinster players. And this will benefit Ireland definitely. You can see where David Nucifora and Joe Schmidt are coming from. Joey Carberry being the classic case in point. He started 9 games already at half for Munster this season, which is 9 times what he did for Leinster last season, and almost as many as he's done the last 2 seasons. Includes 3 Heineken Cup games, Interpro derbies, so forth. So clearly it's a benefit to him, which is a benefit to Ireland, as is Chris Farrell being there, Andrew Conway, John Cooney up north, Jordy Murphy, maybe Marty Moore, others. There'd be quite a smattering of players in the World Cup squad who've benefited from these moves. The only caveat I would add is that when you think back to Ulster in 1999 or Munster in 2006, 2008, like 11 of the 15 maybe, or 16, 17 of the 23 on the final day, all were indigenous products of those provinces. And also, if you look at it, since 2011, Connacht have won 1 pro title, Leinster have won 6 titles between Europe and Pro 14, and the others have won none. So there's a bit of a concentration now of Leinster players, and you wouldn't want it to become too diluted, because the essence of what makes the provinces great is their indigenous qualities. Yeah,
that word dilution, that's a big part of this. What's your take on it, Cian? Is it important that, is it a reality of professional rugby that we're going to maybe dilute that and filter it out a little bit?
Yeah, I think it is. I think in an ideal world, like Gerry says, you'd want Leinster to have all Leinster guys, Munster to have Munster guys, but I think it's just moved on, probably because Ireland are producing so many good young players, and you've got to, different provinces go through different phases at different stages, so you've got to make room for all these guys. Like Gerry says, it's the benefit of Irish rugby. I thought Ian Madigan was actually one of the more interesting people who spoke about this before he made the move to Bordeaux. I think Munster had kind of been in touch with him, and he made the point that he grew up, as a Leinster boy. He grew up not liking Munster. That was the big one, the Leinster, Munster. I thought it was admirable enough to come out and say that he felt like if that started happening, it would dilute the rivalry. But I think even if you look back at the Interpros over Christmas, particularly Munster, Leinster, and Johnny Sexton and Carberry, their couple of brushings, there's no love lost when these guys come down and they switch allegiances. Even I thought Ian Nagle playing against Munster, he was throwing himself around as well, and he's a Cork man, but still he's thrown it up to Munster because he wants to prove a point. So I think it could actually have a benefit to Irish rugby as well.
Yeah, because Carberry's been embraced so lovingly, really, by Munster fans.
Crowd love him. You know, it helps when you score brilliant tries in your first game in Cork and followed by a brilliant try in your first game in Thomond Park. But it was quite obvious the way he was warmly applauded off the pitch in the Leinster-Munster game by the Munster fans. And, his goal kicking's been really good since the Castor game. I think he's 100% in the last 2 matches. He's growing as a player. We've got to cut him some slack. He's still only, 23 thereabouts, Johnny Sexton, Ronan O'Gara hadn't achieved much even at that stage in their careers. And his development is now getting fast-tracked in a way that had he stayed at Leinster, realistically, it wouldn't have happened. Like I said, he only started 1 game there last season. Sure, he got plenty of games at 15, but looking at the Ian Madigan example, 4 years ago, Ian Madigan didn't have an awful lot of rugby under his belt at 10 for Leinster, and he was the second choice Irish out half. You can see already why this is going to benefit Ireland hugely come the Six Nations or the World Cup, to have a number 2 who's now playing regular game time at 10. And also, of course, the partnership with Conor Murray is only still in its fledgling state, still only about 3 games together, I think, through various injuries and so forth. So that will only grow, he'll only get better and better and better.
I guess the thing with Carberry was that Leinster were obviously deeply unhappy with how it came about. And they're probably a bit frustrated with the number of Leinster players, as you mentioned, Gerry. There's all across the country. Is that frustration understandable, do you think, or are they benefiting from, say, the school system, which is giving them that much more play?
Yeah, I think they are. Like, their playing numbers are huge, and like, you want to see these guys playing rugby. Like, Leinster are producing a lot of exciting talents, and I think you've got to admire the younger ones as well, who actually are showing a bit of ambition. I think Jordy Murphy was the prime example of that. He sat down with Leinster last season and thought his better chances of playing for Ireland were going to Ulster. So rather than kind of sitting there and picking up your paycheck, I think it's actually good to see a bit of get up and go about these younger lads. Like, we've seen a lot of it in the last few weeks, like Tom Daly, Stephen Fitzgerald, these younger guys, like, they could easily sit back, and play B&I Cup or whatever, go play AIL at the weekends, but they're showing a bit more ambition. So while Leinster have a reason to be frustrated, I think in the bigger picture it's going to benefit Irish rugby.
Yeah, it has been a sea change. Guys aren't worried about that drive down or up from Dublin as much anymore. Like, you mentioned a couple of loan signings there, Daly and Nagel. Is that something potentially we could see more of, given that guys are going to have, or squads are going to have injuries in certain positions?
Well, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? I mean, Tom Daly was quite impressive on his debut for Connacht last week. He was one of 6 Lansdowne players in the Connacht starting 15. And all of them benefited. We should give right credit to the school system in Leinster, although they've got huge advantages in terms of finances and facilities and all the rest of it. And they do have these 27 players now playing around the other provinces. I wouldn't say Leinster regret too many of them, really. I think Tyg Byrne was one they regret. That, of their own volition they let go. But generally the ones that do leave, that they don't like leaving, do so of their own volition, like Joey Carberry or Cian Keller or whatever. By and large, they keep the ones they want to keep, by and large. And they're all the stronger for that. I mean, what Leinster are doing now is akin to Ajax in football in the 90s. There's just, I don't know if there's a conveyor belt like it in the world, certainly not in Europe, coming out of one club province. And it's remarkable. I just would be worried that if this goes on like this, at what point will we come when there might be 40 or 50 ex-Leinster players in the other provinces? And that wouldn't be ideal. We need more players coming through from the other provinces.
Because it's been interesting to hear, like you mentioned, the value of homegrown players in Lancaster kind of coming in and highlighting to Leinster players. This is so unique. Like 88% of your squad is homegrown. Cian, what about the kind of older players? We're talking about young guys here a lot. What about guys like Ian Keatley now is going to go across to Benetton? A great move for him. That'll be fun living over in Italy, and he'll offer a lot of value there. Do you think players like that who are maybe 30, 31, do they have value to offer to other provinces? Is there potentially scope for a bit more of that? Yeah,
definitely. I think, Ian Keatley's a good example. I think, there's a lot of guys, we're in the contract negotiation season, aren't we, at the moment? And there's a lot of guys in that sort of age bracket going to be thinking, okay, am I actually adding anything to the setup here? But Ian Keatley's a good example. I think Munster fans who've watched Munster properly over the last couple of years will be sad to see him go, because despite the criticism that he's gotten, he's added so much to Munster, and that really shouldn't be forgotten about, I don't think, in all of this. But it's not just about, like we mentioned, Nagel as well. Ian Nagel obviously went to Leinster and now is on loan with Ulster. So these guys have a lot to offer, and you don't want to see them getting out of the system. And I think we give the IRFU a lot of criticism when we feel like it's merited, but I think in what they're doing now, you mentioned David Nusafora in his grand plan, I think it really is working. And you look at the results the provinces had, and even Ireland last year, now going into a World Cup year, I think they deserve a lot of credit for what they're actually doing with the big grand plan picture.
And as you say, they buy into the local province every bit as much as the foreign players do. In that Leinster-Munster match, it was quite obvious how often Tyg Byrne, Joey Carberry and Andrew Conway were up for a scrap against their one-time buddies. And they do buy into it. There's no question that they're not very much a key part of what these problems are about. If you don't buy in, you don't belong.
Yeah, plenty more to come, I would imagine. Well, coming up after the break, we'll look ahead to this weekend's European action with Leinster, Munster and Ulster all still in contention. You're very welcome back. Well, Cian and Gerry are still with me. Gerry, we're over to Kingsholm on Friday night. Let's start there. It's going to be a huge game. How do you think Munster's last fortnight, beating Leinster and obviously another good result last weekend, have set them up for this contest? Almost perfectly. I mean, they were probably the main beneficiaries out of the Christmas programme. Beating Leinster was huge for them. There would have been 5 defeats in a row, possibly against 14 men in front of a festive home crowd. To win that was hugely important for them. Complete an unbeaten 2018 at home, and then to back it up, I was also at both the games, and I thought the performance in Sports Ground was their best of the season. The big thing for me was Peter O'Mahony, the 2 weeks rest, back, re-energised, huge big plays, had a big influence on the game. And a bit like when Paul O'Connell was in his pomp at Munster, when O'Mahony plays, the Munster pack is just more effective. You can throw a blanket over their maul, you can throw a blanket over a lot of the work they do. And you've got Conor Murray and Joey Carbery becoming better at half back. Earlsey looking really sharp, Conway looking really sharp. The one problem is their midfield. They just can't seem to get a consistent run of players there and just develop a partnership there. You saw the benefit of Chris Farrell back in the team. His influence really grew in the game. But yeah, I think they go over to this match in a good place. It is a 6-day turnaround. They did go in locked and fully loaded against Connacht, but they're in a European corner. It's funny, they're the only Irish team winning their pools, and yet they're the most vulnerable because only one team will qualify from that pool, and they're effectively into playoff rugby now against Gloucester away, who will be up for this game in a major way, and it'll be significant whether Cipriani plays or not, because when Cipriani plays, Gloucester are just a different team. You know, his passing range is just better than any other out half around, really, in the Premiership, certainly. And I think Romain Poit will be a key figure. Friday night game. Romain Poit tends to leave his mark in games, as we know, and it could be a nail-biting one. It could be a white-knuckle ride, but I do think when Munster generally are backed into a corner, they generally come through. Yeah, they do look revived. Even Peter O'Mahony was a couple of smiles at the press conference earlier this week, so that was good to see. Cian, you wrote last week about their attack and maybe not judging until Chris Farrell was part of a first-choice backline. We got that. It looked good. How much do you think that we saw in that game against Connacht Munster will be able to do without? It looks like without Chris Farrell. Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that Munster's 2 best attacking performances this season have been against Edinburgh, albeit against a depleted Edinburgh side, and Connacht when Chris Farrell was playing both games. But I think one of the most interesting aspects of the attack, actually, for me, was Andrew Conway at full back. I know Mike Haley was up for media this week, which is usually an indication that he'll start, but I think Andrew Conway adds so much from fullback, and I think he gets involved. He ran that decoy line for one of the early tries. I think Munster have a slight edge. I think there's no doubt that Mike Haley is a quality player, but I don't think he's really fired yet in all cylinders. There's definitely a lot more to come, but I was just kind of curious I'd love to know what, behind the scenes, like Felix Jones and Johan van Gran are thinking, because I just thought they looked like a better attacking force with Conway at full back, with Earls, and then if you brought someone like Sweetenham onto the wing, you're not necessarily weakening the team either. Farrell is a huge loss, like Gerry said. It's cruel on him. After coming back from the 2 ACLs to injure his other knee, and especially in the last play of the game, and it was so innocuous. At the end, you saw him shaking his head to the bench. Now I don't know, was that Tyler Blaindahl who almost gave away the game at the end with that little kick that he was doing, because Munster should have just seen that game out. So it was cruel. I think it's going to be interesting to see. Like, Dan Goggin played well again. You'd imagine Rory Scannell will be at 12. Will it be Sammy Arnold or Dan Goggin? 2 good options, but I don't think either of them can give you what Chris Farrell does, because not just does he get you over the gain line with his big carries, but his vision, his passing for someone so big and powerful, I think, is excellent. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges for Munster this week, trying to build on that attack and not taking a backward step without having Farrell there. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. Gerry, game of the weekend potentially is Leinster against Toulouse. Toulouse are resurgent. Yeah, it's been great to watch. How do you see this one going? Yeah, I must admit Toulouse have surprised me. Going over to that first game, you were there, I was there. I really thought Leinster were going to win that match a week after what they did to us, 52-3, which was the performance of the season so far. They started badly, Leinster, but then they looked to be in a winning position and pushing on for a bonus point win, which would have just changed the whole complexion of this group and Toulouse's season. But Toulouse got off with the Freddie Burns mishap late on, and then a week later they get that wondrous try off turnover ball, and that is their strength this season. Their transitioning from defence to attack is brilliant, and Leinster knew about this.
And they've actually grown since then. They're now 12 games unbeaten. Antoine Dupont came on out half that day. He's been playing scrum half since then, and he adds another X factor to that back line. The footwork of Colbe and Guitan really did for Leinster that day. Medar's back to his best. You've got Romain Ntamak at 19, given all this visionary passing range and footballing ability. They are a very potent team, and what really surprised Leinster, and me too, is how fit they were. They lasted the 80 minutes. They're the only team in the competition that hasn't conceded a try in the last 20 minutes, which for a French team is very surprising. So this, though, talking to Regisson this week, they regard this as their litmus test. How far have they really gone? And I do think that the defeats to Munster and to Toulouse first time out, when they feel they got a hard deal by Wayne Barnes, I think will prompt a really big performance from Leinster this weekend.
Great to see Toulouse back in that kind of form, though. Kind of brings back some good memories. What of Leinster, Cian? I mean, it's not looking great for Johnny Sexton at the moment. Leinster have rated him 50-50, but it looks like he may be out. Robbie Henshaw might come too early for him. 10-12 is always key. And James Lowe obviously missing in the back line as well. So where do you see that going if those guys are certainly not playing?
They're massive losses, there's no doubt about it. But I think you can get Ross Byrne. I think, he can slot in there. I think it was probably telling that he didn't play at all last weekend as much as he would have wanted to. And we talk about people being put up for media. He was put up for media. But I guess that showed you the concerns that Leinster had. I thought Rory O'Loughlin did well with with Gary Ringrose against Bath. I think the biggest thing for Leinster will be actually focusing on what they can bring. We were both talking to Gary Ringrose today, and one of the most interesting things that he was telling us was there's such a fine balance between recognising the threats that Toulouse have, but actually firing a shot yourself, because you can get so caught up in the likes of Colby and Guitan. Like, these guys are just sensational players, but even without those guys, Leinster have a lot of firepower with the likes of Jordan Larmour, like Ringrose himself, and Rob Kearney coming back is huge. So I think there's going to be a big onus on Ringrose at 13 if Henshaw and Sexton don't play, because he'll have two very inexperienced players alongside him. But I still think Leinster are smarting from that defeat in Toulouse. I feel like they have a point to prove. They're the champions, their own backyard. So I think they'll probably get it done, but it won't be easy. But it's going to be a cracker, isn't it?
Yeah, just in terms of specifically around the tactical kind of approach last time and what they did poorly, Leinster, what do you think will be the focuses? You mentioned that transition attack, which is lethal. Yeah,
they've got to be more careful with the ball. They forced the pass too much, and it cost them dearly in that game. I think although they had 60% possession that day, I think you'd see them emulate that or maybe even go higher. I think they'll be more cautious of the ball. I think they'll try and build a lead. I think they'll use their scrum and their maul. I think they'll really try and impose themselves, starve Toulouse of as much possession as they possibly can. And you'll have them very fired up, and you'll have also an RDS packed to the rafters, even though it's a 1 o'clock kickoff, that will be fully into this game as well, because they realise the threat of this is European aristocracy, the two four-time winners. It's just, you couldn't build it up any bigger than it already is. And I just think that Leinster are primed for a very big performance. You can see the scrum, Tyke Furlong, all the big hitters up front having big games. And I just think Ross Byrne will be a fine fit. He started both the wins over Montpellier. Won't be worried about him at all. But I think Lowe's X factor will be a miss. And it'll be interesting to see the composition of the back three and who goes up against Cheslin Colby in his wing. Like, if it's Adam Byrne, there could be tries at both ends of the pitch, put it that way. But I do believe that Leinster have enough about them to win.
Yeah, it's going to be a thriller either way. Ulster, of course, welcome Racing in a huge game in their pool. We've probably seen two sides of Ulster, really. Those back-to-back Scarlets games, they were superb. And then back to Interpros, and rotation probably deprives them of their key guys. What do you expect to see? Do you think it'll be a return to those two Scarlets games in terms of performance?
You'd hope so. Like, they'd built up 4 wins in December, and then to go back-to-back defeats, albeit with weaker teams, like, you'd just hope that wouldn't damage the morale. I think Ulster are far ahead in terms of their development. Me being honest about it, I didn't think they'd be this far. I didn't think they'd be in with a chance of getting out of the pool. So I think that's a massive positive. Going up against Racing, I think we've actually spoken about Racing on the show before. Like, they're just ridiculously good. I believe Donncha Ryan is going to be back this week as well, which is a massive boost to them, because for all of their flair and star power, I think he adds a real edge to their pack, and he complements Nakarawa really well. Simon Zebo coming back. It's going to be an unbelievably tough test. I would just hope that the back-to-back defeats hasn't sort of, brought them back down a bit, because they were riding such a crest of a wave. Those back-to-back wins against Scarlets were so impressive. But, with the likes of Rory Best, Ian Henderson is going to be a massive loss as well. I thought Alan O'Connor was probably the pick of Ulster's players against Leinster last week. There's going to be a big onus on him and Treadwell, going up against the Ryan and Nakarawa, like I said. But yeah, I think it's going to be tough for Ulster, to be honest. I think even at scrum time, they could struggle, but you'd hope that they can somehow find a way, but it won't be easy, will it?
How much better are Racing now, do you think? given that they have Russell, Zebo, that...
I think they're a bit hit and miss, to be honest.
Really, yeah.
Yeah, I do. Like, their form domestically, they're only running sixth.
Sixth, yeah.
They've been very in and out of games and from week to week. They play an attacking brand of rugby, ironically in La Défense Arena, with Finn Russell at out-half. That is just a joy to watch. There's no out-half around who can take the ball at the game like he does and free his hands in attack or make breaks or pick out a pass. And Simon Zebo is now developing a kind of telepathic understanding with him that he used to have with Conor Murray. I mean, I thought you and Stephen Ferris did a really good piece before one of the Munster matches recently where they were talking about the space around the ruck area that wasn't being filled by Munster players, weren't seeing where the space is. That's where Zebo was brilliant, roving, picking out the space, and particularly with Conor Murray. He's now doing that with Finn Russell. They have a great understanding. Agree with you. I think Ulster have got a really good team and they'll put a big performance in, but Ian Henderson is a huge loss. I mean, it's the way he executes choke tackles, his line-out influence, and this, after all, is the line-out that defensively Johan van Graan said was the second best in the world after the All Blacks before they filleted the Munster line-out in the semi-finals last year. And I just think they could do a little bit of damage there. I'd be less worried about the scrum, which was a huge issue in the first game, but I think the Ulster scrum has come on hugely since that first game. But with the way Racing are playing in Europe, they look really up to this competition this year, and they are the beaten finalists from last year. And I always think the runners-up from a year before are the most motivated team going into a competition.
Well, Gerry mentioned the scrum there. What else about that game over in Paris do you think Ulster will have learned from? I remember speaking to Rory Best afterwards, extremely frustrated. Maybe how they compounded error with error. Was that a sign of an inexperienced?
Yeah, no, you'd hope that they'd be better for that experience. They were just blown away, like in Paris. They kind of fits and starts. But I think Gerry is right. You know, Racing have been slightly hit and miss, but I feel like they're really targeting Europe this season, which makes them such a dangerous proposition. Like you said, down in sixth in the top 14. I think they have all eyes on going one better. I think though Finn Russell can be got at. You mentioned the La Défense Arena, like it's just a space oddity in there. But I think going to Ravenhill, that's a very different beast.
And if any coach should have a game plan devised, stop Finn Russell, Dan McFarland.
Yeah. And if you can get at him, like. He's flaky, like at the best of times. As much as the flair and all that, I think if Rory Best and the pack can get at him, Ulster have a fighting chance. Yeah,
well, great weekend, guys. Enjoy it all. Well, don't forget you can see all three of the Irish provinces in European Champions Cup action on the Air Sport Pack this weekend. Starting on Friday evening when Munster travel to Kingsholm to take on Gloucester. That's from 7 on BT Sport 2. Then on Saturday it's Leinster against Toulouse at the RDS in a must-win game for the defending champions. That's from 12:30 on BT Sport 2. And that's followed by Ulster versus Racing at Kingspan Stadium in Belfast. That's from 3 o'clock on BT Sport 3. OK, that's all we have time for on the back row tonight. And thanks to Cian and Gerry. The European matches mean we take a break for the next couple of weeks now, but we'll be back at the end of January, so we'll see you then. Thanks very much for watching.